And we're almost ready. It's in the process of preparing to stream to Facebook Live. And we're on.
All right.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Glenda Carroll. And I wasn't here last month because a bunch of us were at Left Coast Prime, which was really fun. I'd never been before.
Yes.
But this, as you know, is I'm here for, excuse me, my voice is hoarse. I've had a cold. I'm here for Mystery Writers of America, the Northern California chapter. And this is where our own authors from this chapter give short, focused talks on the craft of crime. And this has been a great series. Everybody enjoys it. One thing I want to mention before I get any further is that everything that we do here, once this is over, it shows back up on Facebook, like within a minute after this program is over. So you can always go back and see it. Well, today we're going to talk about our main characters in our books, Protagonists and Antagonists. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I can do one pretty well, but not the other. So Margaret Lucke is going to talk about worthy opponents, how to create memorable protagonists and antagonists. Now, if you have a question during this, just put it in the chat or the comment section of Facebook, okay? And I think that's all I have to say for this time. So Margaret, I'm going to disappear as soon as I find the right buttons to push.
Okay.
You have any questions for me? Just say, Glenda, I need help with XYZ.
Okay.
And it's all yours.
Well, thank you. And welcome, everybody. I'm Margaret Lucke. Some of you know me as Peggy. I've been a member of MWA NorCal for a long time. I was actually once president of this group, and it's a wonderful group. So, be sure to look into it further. They have many resources to offer you. I write 2 series. One has an artist private eye as the main character. The other is a paranormal series that features a Marin County real estate agent who has strange experiences when she goes into some houses, and my haunted house series. And I also teach fiction writing classes. I'm going to be teaching one in the fall for UC Berkeley Extension. So go to their website or contact me somehow if you are interested in knowing more about that. I've got a little slideshow here for your protagonists and antagonists, the worthy opponents of your story. So I'm going to share my screen because these are your main characters. And it's important to have characters that your readers are going to relate to. So I'll start with giving a quick overview of a story, any story, and what a story is. And a story is what happens when you have a character who encounters a conflict while in pursuit of a goal. That goal, or the protagonist there, is your main character. The character is the protagonist, the center of your story. And the goal that she's after is what she wants to achieve or obtain by the end of the story, or he, depending on who your character is. But there's something that they want, something that will help them meet a challenge, solve a problem, take advantage of an opportunity, and through that get something that they are hoping for. However, there's conflict. Someone or something gets in the way, and that's what makes the story interesting. So the action of the story comes from the protagonist's effort to overcome those obstacles and achieve that goal. And the primary obstacle in many stories, and particularly in mysteries, is your antagonist, especially if this is a person who's taking direct action to prevent your protagonist from reaching the goal. I found it interesting at one point to look at the roots of those words. And they come from the Greek, and protagonist comes from these two roots, protos, agonistes. Protos is the first or the main or the chief or the most important person in your story in this case. But agonistes is to engage in combat or struggle. So your protagonist is your number one combatant in this struggle that is the conflict of your story. The antagonist comes from anti, to oppose, to be against. And there's that agonistes again. So the antagonist is the main opponent in the combat. The word agony comes from the same root, and what you're going to be doing in your story is put both of these characters, hopefully, through a bit of agony. Your reader, maybe not so much agony, because you want your reader to enjoy the story, but readers like reading about characters who are going through this struggle. So the job of your protagonist is to engage your reader's interest in the conflict and to get the reader to root for her success or his success, as the case may be. The job of the antagonist in your story is to oppose the protagonist and provide the conflict. The antagonist is the person in your story whose goals are most opposed to the protagonist's goal. It's the person whose efforts to reach her goal or his goal are threatened by the protagonist's actions and vice versa. They're struggling in some ways against each other. And it's the person who poses the biggest threat to the protagonist's success. So, the villain is your main source of conflict and tension and suspense. Those necessary qualities in all of literature. Without a worthy villain, there cannot be a worthy hero. These are words of William G. Tapley, a mystery author, the late William G. Tapley. Wonderful series of books. If you haven't read them, I suggest you go find them. So how does all this apply to a mystery? Because we're writing mystery novels, most of us here. So you've got your protagonist. Your protagonist is your detective. I like to use the word detective for the protagonist in a mystery. And by the way, when I'm talking about mysteries, I'm talking about all kinds of crime fiction, thrillers too. Back when Mystery Writers of America was founded back in the late 40s, mystery was the umbrella term. Now crime fiction is a little more the umbrella term. So this applies no matter what kind of crime fiction you're writing. But generally speaking, you've got a detective who's trying to figure things out, solve a crime, figure out who's behind a threat that's going to, blow up the neighborhood, restore order to the community in which they're operating, and bring about some sort of justice and resolution. Usually, you've got a choice of three possibilities: the cop, or somebody who works for a government agency and is part of that public safety network that we all rely on. You've got the PI, the private investigator, and that could be a lawyer, it could be a journalist. According to the Private Eye Writers of America, a private eye is somebody who is working to solve the crime for pay, but is not in the employ of a government agency. And then you have your amateur sleuth. We have Miss Marple here as an example. And your detective's goals are to solve the crime and bring about justice. And also to resolve the personal issue that this case created or affected. Because for me anyway, the best mysteries, the best novels are the ones where there's a real reason for the detective to be involved. Even if the detective is a cop what is it about this particular case of all the cases they've worked on is the one that you're writing about? What is important to this cop about this case, or whoever your detective is? Why does this case matter? And the antagonist is going to be your villain, generally the perpetrator of the crime, the person who's either committed the murder or is the one who has planted the bomb that's going to blow up. It's the bad guy, if you will. Now, one of the things about writing crime fiction, about writing mysteries, is what you're really doing is you're creating two stories in one. Because that's true of all crime fiction, is that it's two stories that you've got going. There's the surface story. And this is what happens as the detective goes about conducting the investigation, trying to find out what's going on. This is the narrative that you're actually writing and that your readers are reading. But underneath that surface story is what I think of as the hidden story. The hidden story is the who did what to whom and why. All of those secrets that your protagonist is trying to uncover. Sometimes you get a story where you've got parallel narratives. You've got the reader is privy to what's going on in the hidden story. You're reading some of that too, but not most of the time. Most of the time, we're just reading the narrative story, and the hidden story is down, buried underneath. But when you think about it, the antagonist of the surface story is the protagonist, the main character of the hidden story. So that person kind of has that double role. The villain's goals are to achieve whatever purpose it was that motivated them to commit the crime in the first place or to plan the crime in the first place, and also to keep his or her involvement a secret and get away with it. So you've got these two people working at cross purposes, trying to solve the crime, trying to get away with the crime. And the conflict comes because their goals are getting in each other's way. And from the point of view of the villain, of your antagonist, he or she's the hero of his own myth, and the audience's hero is his villain. And I find it really interesting to think of that story that way. What is this person trying to accomplish? What is them that makes them the protagonist of their own story? And what would your story be like if you told it from the antagonist's point of view? Sometimes in a thriller, you get, as I say, you get that double narrative and you find out what it's like from the antagonist's point of view because the author is giving you that. But even if you're not planning to write it that way, it's interesting to think about it. What is the antagonist's point of view of what's going on? So what do you do to create a great protagonist? So here's sort of my top 10 pointers for that. A great protagonist is a fully developed three-dimensional character. That sort of goes without saying. It's somebody who has a past and a future. You want to know the backstory of your character, even if you don't weave in a whole lot of it into your story. And you also want to have what I think of as the future story. Where is this person going to go from here? Because you want your main character to be somebody who feels real enough to your readers that they imagine them going on existing, that they just don't stop existing when you reach the last page of the book. It's somebody who has a strong personal stake in the matter at hand. What's going on matters to this person, as I mentioned before. You want somebody who's a participant in the story, not merely an observer or a reporter. That gets a little tricky sometimes. When I was writing Snow Angel, this book right over here with Jess Randolph, my artist PI, she was there, she was involved in the case, but I was having a little trouble figuring out, okay, why is she here? I mean, she's trying to help out these people, but why does this matter to her? What is it about this particular case that really is going to make a difference and tie her and thereby tie the reader into what's going on? What makes her the main character in this story and not somebody who's kind of on the fringes of what's going on? And it took me a while to figure that out. And hopefully I did come up with a good solution for that. But you want somebody who's actually playing a role in what's happening. You want somebody who has a goal or desire that's initiated or affected by the story situation, because if they don't have something they're striving for, there's no reason for them to be there. It's that attempt to achieve that goal or desire that's the whole point of what you're reading, what you're writing. Your main character, your great protagonist, has some kind of hidden need, some kind of inner conflict or issue that must be resolved. And this story is tapping into it and giving them some reason or ability to deal with it. A great protagonist draws on their own strengths and inner resources to deal with the situation. If they're going to solve the crime, they get to solve the crime. They get to use what they have as their own strengths and tools to help solve the crime. But they also have flaws that interfere with the ability to resolve the situation, because you don't want somebody who's going to be perfect. They're unbelievable. You can't relate to them. And watching how they deal with those flaws is often part of the interesting part of the book. You want somebody that has opinions, beliefs, and emotions, especially hopes and fears, that are shared with your reader. Because it's been said that the purpose of fiction is to give your reader a powerful emotional experience. It's the emotions that really draw you in. When I was writing my first novel, I was in a writer's group, and there was a member who joined when I was about halfway through this book, and he'd already published several novels, so he knew a lot more about it than I did. And I gave him my manuscript, such as it was up to that point, so he'd catch up and be where everybody else was in the reading of the novel as we went along in the group. And he read it and he gave it back to me and he says, well, you know, all of your people here are kind of pussyfooting around each other and they're tiptoeing around and they're very polite. And I read for the emotions. I want to see your characters have more emotions. Well, I thought I had done that, but apparently not. So I rewrote a big section of it and I just really ramped up the emotions, and I threw in the yellow journalism and the purple prose, and I said, now this will show them. And I shared this with the group, expecting them kind of all to laugh at how overwritten it was. But you know what the response was? Yeah, that's a little better. So sometimes it's hard to know that, but readers really want that. And you also want a protagonist who's going to change in some way as a result of the story. So there you are, you're creating your great protagonist. Now you want to give them that worthy opponent. So what do you do to create a great antagonist? The antagonist is not necessarily a worthy antagonist, is not necessarily a cartoon villain like the one you see here. Alfred Hitchcock at one point says, in the old days, villains had mustaches and kicked the dog. Audiences are smarter today. They want an ordinary human being with failings. And Barbara Peters, who runs the esteemed Poison Pen Press, as well as the Poison Pen bookstore, The villain should be someone worthy of the sleuth's intelligence and efforts to apprehend him or her, as well as worthy of the reader's time and emotional investment. So you want somebody who is a believable and interesting character in his or her own right. All of the things that apply to a great protagonist also really apply to a great antagonist. You want them to be a real person, a believable person. A great antagonist is as committed to achieving his or her goals as your hero is. So they've got that commitment. You also want somebody who is as intelligent or as courageous, as talented, and as resourceful as your hero, because you want an even match. You want this to be a real contest. You want the reader to think and believe, for the purpose of reading the story while they're reading it, that the outcome is in doubt. Even if it's part of a series and you know the hero is going to prevail in the end, you still want that, plant that seed of doubt in the reader's understanding. You want somebody who has understandable and coherent motivations, even if they aren't sympathetic motivations. You want them to be believable. Often your antagonist is motivated from some sort of negative emotion, like one of the ones listed here. They're afraid, they're overly ambitious, they're greedy for whatever reason, whatever lack they're filling with that. There's a lot of negative emotions you have to choose from, but that is often, sometimes unbeknownst to them, what they're responding to. Often they are acting out of some kind of prejudice or bigotry or false assumptions about other people. But whatever it is, your antagonist believes his or her actions to be necessary and justified. This is somebody who may look like a good person on the surface, and probably does for a while, because you want somebody who's going to appear early in the book. That's one of the many rules that were promulgated about mystery writing back in the 20s and 30s. One of the ones that persists. Most of them have gone by the wayside, like the one about not having any romance in the story, not having any paranormal in the story. Those have kind of gone by the wayside. But the one that says you want your villain to show up early in the book and play a role, even if we don't know yet that this is the villain. So often they do look like a good person on the surface. And that is because they have some genuinely positive and likable qualities. I once read a book in draft by a member of one of my writing groups, and the villain was very villainous. And the writer was having a great time creating this villainous villain. And I was asked at one point, well, why is this person like this? You know, all they seem to be is just these terrible qualities. You know, what's behind all of that? And, oh, well, they just like villainy. They're just villainous for the sake of being villainous. I mean, so well, what are the good qualities that kind of balance that out and make them human? And it was a puzzling question to the author, but I think the book would have been richer. And I think in the end, the author did agree and created some good qualities to make this person more well-rounded. And it's somebody who will challenge your hero to test the limits of his or her own courage or ability. And you want to think about this. Every character has the potential to be a villain. Even your protagonist does, depending on what the situation is. So for your antagonist, what is it in this particular character's backstory that put him on a villainous path? So here's a few final thoughts, just a couple. This one I sort of like, No one is ever just straight up protagonist or antagonist. Everybody's morally ambiguous. And this one too. I think all of us have a hero and a villain in us. In your story, your protagonist will emphasize the hero qualities and your antagonist will emphasize the villain qualities. But they are all capable of switching roles if the situation calls for it. So, a great protagonist and a great antagonist are worthy opponents through whom you express your ideas and tell your story. So, thank you for that. That's who I am. That's how you can find me if you would like to, margaretlucke.com. And Glenda, back to you.
Yes. Okay. Well, now, excuse me, now's the time that you can drop your questions into the comment section. And as you were talking, I was wondering, is there ever an opportunity or a chance where you have two antagonists or two protagonists? Does that ever happen?
Oh, of course. I think it probably happens often. You might have two people who are in league with each other, working toward the same kind of thing. You might have a situation where you've got a subplot that has a different antagonist from your main plot. Obviously, what I was talking about is simplifying all of this a great deal. But certainly that is possible to do. You're still likely to have one main character, one protagonist, because that's the person you're following through the book. It's usually your point of view character. But throw as many obstacles in their way and as many antagonists as your story will call for. The more the merrier in some ways, as long as your story doesn't get too confusing and too overloaded with conflict more than the protagonist can resolve within the 100,000 pages or so.
One of the things I was thinking of is I am sort of a pantser kind of writer. I don't really know where things are going sometimes till I actually write it. And that also comes up when I'm deciding who it is the protagonist, that there can be, sometimes I've come up with, well, it could be this person, well, it could be that person, and I'm wondering if that's not, maybe I'm not doing the story justice because I can't really focus on one. I don't know.
I think that's fine. And in a mystery, you may not want to know until the very end who the real antagonist has been all along. You may have others who appear to be the antagonist, or maybe antagonists and subplots, and this is where your suspects come from. Since everybody has that capacity to be hero or villain, you may have people who appear villainous who turn out not to be the case. A piece of advice I got about writing a mystery very early on from Marcia Muller, who went on to become a Grand Master from Mystery Writers of America for her, she's best known for her series of books with the private detective Sharon McCone. She was telling me the story of writing her first book and realizing that her antagonist was obvious about halfway through a book's length of manuscript. It was sort of like she had to figure out somebody else who had done the crime. And even though it looked to everybody like, villain A had done it, it had to turn out to be villain B, or she'd only have half a book. And she said, so the advice was to always come up with a backup villain. The person who could be it, if it turns out when you're writing along, you discover, no, this person didn't do it after all, because we have these surprises when we write. And it was great advice to me as I was writing my first book, and it turned out I came up with a backup villain, the person who would be the villain should the first one did not work out. And I realized after thinking about it that my backup villain really had much more reason and made a much more interesting villain than the person I had first thought of. So I demoted my initial villain to the backup status. So I think that that's, a good piece of advice to bear in mind is think of who your backup villain might be. And then they become a good suspect as well, even if it turns out they didn't do it.
Okay. George Kramer asks, can we get a copy of your excellent PowerPoint presentation?
Absolutely. All you have to do is ask for it. If you go to margaretlucke.com, my name, Lucke is Lucke, then just there's a form you can fill out and just say, I'd like a copy of your Facebook Live PowerPoint, and I'll be happy to send it to you.
I wonder if you could take us through either an antagonist or a protagonist from one of your books and how they developed and maybe changed.
Okay, that's an interesting challenge. How they changed.
One of the things I was always told, at least about the protagonists, they're supposed to, something happens that they're a different person in some way by the time the book is over. Either they've, mastered some inner quirk or something.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about Claire Scanlon, who is the protagonist of my Haunted House series. And House of Desire is the second one. The first one is House of Whispers, and I'm about halfway through writing one that has the working title of House of Pancakes, but that probably will not be the final title. She is what I think of as a reluctant psychic. And one of the things about that is, psychic abilities take many forms. There's a lot of different skills and talents that get that label. Hers is that she experiences things when she walks into certain houses. She's sensitive to energies that other people don't have that sensitivity to, and it scares her at first. And part of the journey in the first book, and to some extent in the second book, where the abilities that she has stretch a little bit, she finds she's encountering, she's able to do a little more in that regard. She's able to sense things more clearly. And a lot of it, the struggle in her book is she does not want this skill. This is not something she asked for. This is not something she desires. This is something she'd be happy to get rid of. So part of her journey is a journey to some level of acceptance of having this unusual capability that can really get in her way in a lot of ways, but and how she can learn to make use of it. So that's one example. I'm not going to tell you about the antagonists because I don't want to spoil anything here.
Okay.
No spoiler alerts.
Well, that's all that I have in terms of questions. I'm going to pop back on here, hopefully.
Well, hi there.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much. I was looking forward to this particular presentation. In the book I'm doing now, it's book 4, I'm stuck. And I'm not liking what I'm writing, and I've got, 5 or 6 people who could have done it, and I'm not sure if any of them did it. So I'm really this was interesting to me of what I needed to do to kind of rework some of these people to make them, I think they're realistic, but I just need to spend some time with them, I guess, to figure it out a little bit more.
Here's a little suggestion that sometimes works for me. is I'll open up a blank page on my computer, or sometimes I'll even do this with a pad and a pen, and I'll put a question at the top, use the character's name, ask them a question along the lines of, so-and-so, why did you want to murder Jack? If you're not sure who it is. And then let them answer in first person stream of consciousness. And sometimes you'll learn all kinds of interesting things about the character. Now, most of the time, you don't stop, you don't, worry about whether you're putting the commas in the right place. You do it in the first person, letting them answer the question. And when I do this, it often begins with, well, this is a stupid exercise and I'm not going to get anything out of it. And I don't know why why you're wasting your time and my time like this, because I'm not going to tell you anything that has anything to do with the story. And, why don't you just go clean out the closets or do something useful? And by the way, did you know that? And, I'll find that after 5 or 6 or 10 lines of writing this gibberish of resistance, sometimes they'll speak to me and I'll learn a little something about them. And some of it ends up in the book and some of it doesn't. But I find that that can be a useful exercise for getting to know a resistant character.
Okay, thank you. That's a great idea. Let me just check one more time. No, I don't see any more questions. But I just wanted to thank you so much, Peggy. This was great. I just appreciated your wisdom and how you just kind of put it out there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I feel that if I could follow that, I'm going to come up with something that is definitely believable. And as I mentioned earlier, that as soon as we end this video, it shows up on the NCAL MWA Facebook page, like within a minute or two. And if you haven't had a chance to look down at some of the past presentations we've had, just scroll down to where it comes to videos. This is our 2nd year of doing this. So we have got all different kinds of things that you might enjoy listening to and learning a little more about.
And I recommend to everybody that they do that, because there is some great information in those earlier videos. I've watched a lot of them myself. So it's a wonderful resource. And thank you to MWA for doing that.
Thank you so much. So everybody who's out there, I will see you next month. Thank you, Peggy, for being here. And thank you to our viewers for being here. You're loyal viewers, and I really appreciate that. So I will sign us off now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.